I think the tension in General Hospital on Monday, April 20th, really leans into that slow burn chaos the show does so well, where everyone thinks they're in control, but nobody actually is. From my perspective, Michael Corinthos is reaching a breaking point. Watching Willow Kane go after Jacinda Bracken the way she does, it feels like something shifts in him. I didn't realize how quickly his frustration could turn into something colder, more calculated. To me, this isn't just anger anymore. It's the beginning of revenge thinking. Meanwhile, Nina Reeves seems to be playing her own quiet game. She wants to hire someone, and I was wondering if this is less about the task itself and more about appearances, like she's trying to sell a story rather than solve a problem. If this ties into that setup involving Valentine Cassadine and Jack Brennan, then Nina might be walking a very thin line between deception and exposure. At GH, Molly Lansing Davis is in a much more grounded, emotional space. After her surgery, everything hinges on what Dr. Frida Navarro says next. I think there's a quiet optimism there, especially with Cody Bell by her side. They're already thinking ahead. Travel, freedom, maybe even rekindling that spark. But it all depends on whether reality matches hope. Over at Sunny's place, things take on a different energy. Christina Corinthos Davis reconnecting with Ethan Lovett feels nostalgic at first, but it quickly turns strategic. When Ethan reveals he wants to approach Sunny Corinthos about a job, I started to wonder if this is really about work or something more dangerous. Especially considering what Jen Sidwell did to Holly Sutton, it makes sense Ethan would want in on taking him down. That alliance with Sunny? It could get messy fast. Then there's Carly. When Carly Spencer hears about Valentine trusting Nina, she immediately raises red flags. And honestly, I think she might be right. Valentine seems confident, maybe overly so. Trusting Nina in a setup like this feels risky, unless he knows something we don't. Back to Michael. His confrontation with Willow doesn't go the way he expects. She doubles down, drawing a hard line when it comes to their kids. And I think that's what really fuels him. After she walks away, he's not just upset, he's simmering. And then Justinda steps in with a possible angle. If she can get information through Charlotte Cassadine, and if Brennan follows through on that traffic cam footage, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but this could be Michael's way back into control. Not just over the situation, but over Willow. To me, this episode feels like a turning point. Alliances are forming, but they're fragile. Everyone's making moves, but not everyone is playing the same game. I was looking at this week of General Hospital, April 20th to 24th, 2026, and honestly, it feels like one of those stretches where everything is quietly building towards something explosive. Maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of these storylines seem less about what's happening on the surface and more about who's about to lose control. Starting with Willow Tate, I can't shake the feeling that she's crossed into dangerous territory. I was thinking about how she beat an attempted murder charge, has Drew Kane completely under her influence, regained partial custody of her kids, and now holds political power. To me, that kind of streak doesn't just build confidence, it builds a sense that consequences don't apply anymore. And that's where characters usually start making irreversible mistakes. Her confrontation with Michael Corinthos really highlights that shift. I didn't realize how intense she'd become until she starts going after him and even dragging his relationship into it. The warning about keeping Jacinda away from their children didn't feel like concern, it felt like control. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it sounded more like a threat than a boundary. What really stands out to me is how Willow might start using her influence. I don't think this is heading toward anything noble, like helping Brooklyn Quartermain and Harrison Chase with fostering. If anything, I was wondering if she's about to weaponize her position, either against Michael or because she's being pushed by Sidwell. And let's be honest, people like Sidwell don't invest in politicians for charity. Then there's the surprise return of Ethan Lovett. I actually find this part kind of fascinating. His history with Christina Corinthos Davis adds a layer of nostalgia, but it's clear things are very different now. When he shows up wanting a job from Sonny Corinthos, I immediately started wondering what his real motivation is. With Jason Morgan missing, it does make sense that Sonny might need someone new at his side. But Ethan stepping into that role? I'm not completely convinced it's that simple. Maybe I'm wrong, but Ethan has always had a bit of unpredictability, and putting him in that position could either stabilize Sonny's world or completely destabilize it. And then there's Britt Westbourne, whose storyline might be the one that really blows everything open. She's trying to stay under the radar, which already tells me she knows she's in dangerous territory. Her connection to Sidwell and Cullum, especially with her dependence on those meds, makes her incredibly vulnerable. The Pier 55 mystery still feels like the ticking time bomb of the week. I was wondering if Britt is finally going to piece together what really happened that night. If she realizes that Rocco Falconeri followed her and was the one who shot Cullum, that changes everything. And if Jason Morgan has been protecting Rocco this whole time, that's huge. To me, that's where the emotional stakes really spike. It's not just about crime anymore. It's about a child being caught in something dangerous, and a mother realizing just how close that danger is. Britt worrying about Rocco makes total sense, especially if Cullum is still a threat. If the truth comes out, I don't see how this doesn't spiral into something much bigger. Overall, I think this week is less about immediate payoffs and more about setting traps, emotional, political, and criminal. And the scary part is, most of these characters seem convinced they're in control right now. That's usually when everything falls apart. I think this upcoming week on General Hospital is setting up something much bigger than it first appears, and it all seems to hinge on Elizabeth Baldwin quietly putting the pieces together. From what I'm seeing, Liz's visit to Drew Kane on April 23rd doesn't feel random at all. I was wondering if this is one of those classic soap setups where a seemingly small moment, like noticing someone blinking, turns into a full-blown rescue mission. The detail about Drew blinking furiously really stands out to me, because Liz isn't just anyone walking into that room. She's a nurse, and she's someone who knows him on a deeper level. To me, that's the key. Liz isn't going to dismiss something like that as easily as Willow Kane or Nina Reeves might. Even if they try to brush it off, I don't think Liz is the type to let it go. There's this instinct she has, both professionally and emotionally, that something is wrong. And then there's the history. I didn't realize how important that past connection with Drew could become again. Back when she thought he was Jason Morgan, their bond formed under intense circumstances. So even if she doesn't like the man he's become, I think there's still a part of her that feels responsible for him, or at least unwilling to ignore him. What really makes this interesting, though, is the Morse code angle. Drew's Navy SEAL background isn't just a throwaway detail. It might actually be the entire reason this storyline works. Liz remembering that and then connecting it to his blinking feels like one of those slow burn realizations soaps love. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like the moment she figures out that 1 blink means yes and 2 means no, everything shifts. Suddenly, it's not a medical curiosity, it's a cry for help. And honestly, the biggest red flag to me is this. If Drew can communicate through blinking, why isn't anyone properly investigating it? Liz is smart enough to question that. That alone could push her to start digging deeper, even if it puts her at odds with Willow and Nina. That preview moment with Nina is what really seals it for me. Her saying, "Blink all you want, no one is going to save you," feels like the kind of line that changes everything, especially if Liz overhears it. I keep thinking how classic soap this would be. Liz in the next room, catching just enough to realize something is seriously wrong, but not enough for anyone to know she knows. If that happens, I don't see Liz confronting them directly. To me, she'd go quiet, start observing, maybe even test Drew's blinking herself. That's where the tension builds, because now she's in on the secret and they have no idea. So yeah, I think Liz could absolutely be the turning point in this storyline. Not in a loud, dramatic way at first, but in that slow, methodical, I know something you don't know way. And if this plays out the way it's being hinted, she might be the one who brings everything crashing down on Willow and Nina. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it really feels like the show is positioning Liz as the unexpected hero here. I think Tuesday's General Hospital is shaping up to be one of those episodes where everything looks calm on the surface, but underneath, tensions are quietly boiling over. From my perspective, the situation between Curtis Ashford and Isaiah Gannon feels less random than it first appears. I was wondering if Curtis's confrontation is really about the accident at all, or if it's more personal than that. On paper, things have been relatively peaceful in this whole quadrangle with Jordan Ashford, Portia Robinson, Curtis, and Isaiah. But peace in Port Charles rarely lasts. To me, Curtis stepping in now suggests something deeper, maybe unresolved feelings about Jordan, especially seeing her vulnerable after the accident. Isaiah being visibly concerned, constantly around, and emotionally invested could easily rub Curtis the wrong way. Even if Curtis has moved on, I didn't realize how quickly old emotions can resurface when someone you once loved is hurting. There's also the possibility, maybe I'm wrong, that Curtis suspects Isaiah knows more about what happened on Route 91 than he's letting on. That would definitely justify a confrontation that feels sudden on the surface. Meanwhile, the dynamic between Dante Falconeri and Jack Brennan, Cullum, is giving me déjà vu. I think Dante going back for another round of questioning says more about his instincts than the evidence. He clearly doesn't trust Cullum, and honestly, I don't blame him. But if Cullum responds the same way, cold, cryptic, and slightly threatening, then this might just turn into another dead end. Or worse, push things in a more dangerous direction. Then there's Sonny Corinthos, who, to me, is backed into a corner in the most classic Sonny way possible. With Jason Morgan out of reach and Sidwell holding leverage, any move Sonny makes now feels risky by default. I was thinking his risk could be one of two things, either a bold strike against Sidwell or something more calculated involving Ethan Lovett wanting in on his operation. Either way, Rick Lansing being skeptical makes sense. He's trying to rebuild trust, but he's not the type to stay quiet if Sonny's plan looks reckless. And honestly, the part that really caught my attention is Britt Westbourne. I feel like she's constantly being blindsided lately, and it's starting to look intentional from a storytelling perspective, like she's being positioned right in the middle of something huge. If Rocco Falconeri actually confesses to shooting Jason, that changes everything. I think if that confession happens, Britt being the one he turns to would make emotional sense. She's complicated, but she's also someone who understands secrets and consequences. And maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like that kind of revelation wouldn't just shake Britt. It could pull her deeper into the fallout in a way she didn't expect. Overall, I see this episode as a turning point where personal emotions and bigger conspiracies start colliding. The confrontations might look isolated, but to me, they all feel connected, like the calm before a much bigger storm in Port Charles. I think the Ethan as a mole theory actually holds more weight than it first seems, and maybe the show is laying the groundwork a lot more deliberately than we realized. When Ethan Lovett reappeared in Port Charles, that cryptic voicemail immediately stood out to me. I was wondering why the writers would introduce him with secrecy instead of a straightforward family reunion, especially since his first scenes with Lulu Spencer felt warm but off. He said he was back to reconnect, but to me, it didn't quite land as genuine. It felt like a cover. Then there's his quick move towards Sonny Corinthos. That's where things get really interesting. Sonny trusting Ethan makes perfect sense on paper because of Luke Spencer. That history gives Ethan instant credibility, which, if I'm right, is exactly what would make him the perfect undercover asset. No suspicion, no barriers, just a direct path inside. I didn't realize at first how much this mirrors what happened with Jason Morgan. His forced involvement with the authorities set a clear precedent. The show is very comfortable putting loyal characters in impossible positions. So when Jack Brennan hinted that someone like Jason could be pushed into working for the WSB, I think that might not have been random dialogue. Maybe I'm wrong, but it felt like subtle foreshadowing. If the WSB, or even the FBI, has leverage on Ethan, it creates a layered conflict. And honestly, Ethan is the kind of character who would get himself into trouble with powerful people. That part tracks completely with his history. What really makes this theory click for me, though, is Holly Sutton. If there's dirt on her, especially tied to her recent cons and dangerous connections, it raises the stakes in a very personal way. I think Ethan would absolutely risk betraying Sonny if it meant protecting his mother. That emotional pressure feels very General Hospital. And then there's Christina Corinthos Davis. I was wondering if the writers are intentionally setting up a romantic angle here to complicate everything further. Because if Ethan starts falling for Christina while secretly working against her father, that's the kind of emotional conflict soap operas thrive on. It wouldn't just be about espionage. It would be about guilt, divided loyalties, and inevitable fallout. To me, the biggest clue is that Ethan is already lying. Not dramatically, not suspiciously, but just enough to signal that something's not right. And in soap storytelling, that's usually where the long game begins. So I think this storyline could go in two directions. Either Ethan is a full-fledged mole from the start, or he's about to be pulled into that role against his will. Either way, it feels like he's walking into something much bigger than a simple homecoming, and probably something he won't be able to walk away from easily. I didn't have this on my 2026 bingo card at all, but I have to admit, General Hospital really stumbled onto something special with Laura and Ezra. To me, this is exactly the kind of unexpected pairing that keeps a long-running soap feeling fresh. What surprised me most is how naturally Laura Collins and Ezra Boyle clicked on screen. I think a lot of that comes down to the effortless chemistry between Jeannie Francis and Daniel Cosgrove. It doesn't feel forced or gimmicky, it just works. And I was wondering if the writers even realized how good this dynamic would be when they first put them together. The turning point for me was Ezra hitting rock bottom with Sidwell. Watching him spiral and then quietly unravel at the bar gave us a side of him I didn't expect. Maybe I'm wrong, but Ezra had always felt a bit one note before this. That vulnerability changed everything. And of course, Laura being Laura, she didn't exploit the situation, even when she easily could have. That restraint is exactly why her character still carries so much weight after all these years. I think what makes this pairing so compelling is that it's not romantic, and honestly, it shouldn't be. Laura's history and connection with Kevin Collins are too significant to sideline, even if he's currently off-screen. Instead, what we're getting feels more interesting, the early stages of what could become a classic soap frenemy dynamic. And to me, that's where the real potential lies. There's tension, mutual respect, and just enough unpredictability to keep things engaging. One moment they're allies, the next they could be at odds. It's that kind of layered relationship that soaps thrive on. I've also noticed that fans seem to be on the same page. The excitement isn't about romance, it's about possibility. People are curious to see how this alliance develops, especially now that they're teaming up against Sidwell. That shared goal gives their connection a solid foundation, but also plenty of room for conflict down the line. If the writers play this right, Laura and Ezra could easily become one of those duos we look back on and say, that shouldn't have worked, but somehow it really did. I think the idea that Justinda might secretly be Nell isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. This is General Hospital, after all, where dead characters have a habit of returning with entirely new faces and even newer agendas. When I look at Justinda, I was initially willing to take her backstory at face value. It feels grounded. Troubled past, estranged parents, survival through escort work. But the more she inserts herself into Wiley's life, the more I start wondering if that story is just a carefully constructed cover. It almost feels too neat, like something designed to earn sympathy while hiding a bigger truth. And then there's Nell Benson. To me, Nell's history makes this theory hard to ignore. She wasn't just manipulative, she was relentless. Her obsession with taking down Carly Corinthos and her willingness to emotionally destroy Michael Corinthos show a pattern. She plays the long game. Faking Jonah/Wiley's death, orchestrating chaos, and ultimately going over that cliff, none of that felt like a clean ending for someone like her. I was thinking about how soaps often use extreme events like falls or explosions as setups for reinvention. If Nell survived, facial reconstruction wouldn't just be plausible, it would be almost expected. And suddenly, Justinda's vague past and lack of verifiable history start to look a lot more suspicious. What really stands out to me is her behavior around Wiley. Willow Tate has every reason to be protective, yet Justinda isn't intimidated at all. That boldness, that refusal to back down, it feels very Nell. Not just confidence, but entitlement, like she believes she has a right to be in that child's life. I also can't ignore the strategic angle. Getting close to Michael romantically? That's exactly the kind of move Nell would make if she wanted access to her son without raising suspicion. It's calculated, patient, and deeply personal. Now, I may be wrong. This could all just be a red herring, and Justinda might truly be who she says she is. But to me, the emotional intensity, the secrecy, and especially her fixation on Wiley all point in one direction. This doesn't feel random. It feels intentional. And if Justinda really is Nell, then this isn't just a twist. It's the beginning of another storm in Port Charles, one that could unravel everything Michael and Willow have built. I think this whole situation on General Hospital is shaping up to be less about mob drama and more about a kid spiraling in a way the adults didn't fully anticipate. From my perspective, when Sonny Corinthos gets that unexpected visit from Alexis Davis, it doesn't feel like just another crisis meeting. It feels personal. I was wondering if Alexis coming to Sonny is actually her admitting she's out of her depth with Danny Morgan. She's dealt with legal chaos, mob ties, and family drama for years. But this hits differently because it's about her grandson's identity slipping into something dangerous. The trigger here is clearly tied to Jason Morgan being taken by the WSB. Danny isn't just reacting, he's trying to do something, even if it makes no sense. To me, that's the heartbreaking part. He actually believes becoming like his father could somehow bring him back. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels less like rebellion and more like desperation disguised as toughness. And honestly, the show has been quietly building this. Danny's fights at school, the suspension, and especially that moment with Marco Rios, that wasn't just a random traumatic event. I didn't realize at first, but looking back, that scene kind of cemented this idea that Danny is forcing himself to be fearless. He steps up, handles a stabbing victim, shows no visible fear. It's like he's trying to live up to the stone-cold image in real time. Comparing him to Rocco Falconeri makes the contrast even sharper. Rocco processes things emotionally, while Danny seems to suppress everything and convert it into action. That's a dangerous path, especially for a kid surrounded by mob influence. What I find interesting is Sonny's response. You'd expect him to double down on control or authority, but instead he pushes back on Alexis's instinct to clamp down. To me, that shows growth, or at least awareness. Sonny understands that forcing Danny into a corner will only validate the very instincts they're trying to stop. His idea, finding something constructive that makes Danny feel useful, actually feels like the most grounded solution we've seen in a while. It's not about shutting Danny down, it's about redirecting him. Whether that works is another question entirely. I was thinking this could go one of two ways. Either Danny finds a healthier outlet and this becomes a turning point, or his need to prove himself pulls him deeper into danger despite their efforts. Given General Hospital's track record, I wouldn't be surprised if things escalate before they improve. Either way, this storyline feels like it's setting up Danny as a much more central character moving forward, and not necessarily in a safe direction. I think this whole storyline feels like one of those classic General Hospital arcs, where things start small, one mistake, one bad decision, and suddenly spiral into something much bigger than anyone expected. From my perspective, the real tension isn't just the cold fusion weapon idea, it's Britt herself. I was wondering if the show is leaning into her vulnerability more than the science, because her missing those Huntington's meds changes everything. The tremor in her hand isn't just a symptom, it's a ticking clock. And if she's being pushed by Ross Cullum to rush something that requires precision, that feels like a disaster waiting to happen. To me, this is where it gets almost tragic. Britt Westbourne isn't reckless by nature, she's being cornered. And when you combine that pressure with her condition, it makes the threat feel more personal than just another over-the-top soap catastrophe. I didn't realize how much her illness could directly tie into a larger-scale danger like this, but it actually raises the stakes in a smart way. Now, the legacy angle adds another layer. Anything tied to Caesar Faison automatically carries chaos with it. His history on the show is basically synonymous with schemes that go too far. So if this final project involves unstable science, I think we're supposed to expect the worst-case scenario. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels less like if something goes wrong, and more like how big the fallout will be. And honestly, General Hospital has a pattern here. The comparison to Victor Cassadine and the whole Ice Princess storyline is hard to ignore. That arc, with Spencer Cassadine, Trina Robinson, and the Greenland crisis, was already huge, involving biotoxins and near-global consequences. So if this new plot is meant to top that, a lab disaster or radiation event in Port Charles would fit the show's escalation style. But I do think the blow up the earth angle might be more soap-level exaggeration than literal outcome. Even when GH goes big, it usually keeps the consequences centered on Port Charles and its residents. So a contained explosion, radiation leak, or mass exposure event seems more likely than full-on global annihilation. What really stands out to me is the emotional core beneath all of it. If Britt is at the center of whatever goes wrong, that puts her in a heartbreaking position, especially if Jason Morgan is returning around the same time. I think the show might be setting up a cruel twist. Just when there's a chance for something good, everything collapses. So the big question isn't just who lives or dies, but what kind of damage this leaves behind. Physical, emotional, and maybe even moral. Because if Britt is forced into causing something catastrophic, that's the kind of fallout that lingers long after the explosion. I think General Hospital really tried to make Marco's exit feel final. Ross Cullum stabbing him, the whole cremation angle. It was staged without much room for doubt on the surface. The fallout shook Port Charles and definitely caught fans off guard. But what stuck with me was how Adrian Anchondo subtly pointed out what we didn't actually see, and that alone feels like the kind of detail soaps love to exploit later. When he spoke to Digital Journal, he seemed genuinely satisfied, calling his run a whirlwind, and saying he was happy Marco went out in such an explosive way. But then he dropped that one line that, to me, changes everything. He wasn't in an urn. That's not exactly a denial. It's more like leaving breadcrumbs. In soap logic, that's practically an invitation to question everything. What I find even more interesting is how he talked about Marco as a character. He didn't frame it like a closed chapter. Instead, he focused on the complexity, saying he liked how Marco challenged people's perspectives. From my perspective, actors usually don't speak that warmly about a role if they feel it's completely over. It felt more like he was keeping the door cracked open. And honestly, this is classic soap territory. I've seen it happen over and over. Missing bodies, swapped identities, fake deaths, or conveniently flawed evidence. To me, Marco's situation checks all the boxes. If Anchando really wanted to shut down speculation, he could have done it outright. Instead, he leaned into the mystery. Then there's the storytelling angle. Marco wasn't some throwaway character. He had connections to Lucas, Sidwell, and Cullum, and those dynamics were just starting to get interesting. I can't help but wonder why the show would build all that tension only to erase him so abruptly, unless there's more to come. Anchando also seemed very aware of how soaps operate. He mentioned how characters like Carly have been recast multiple times, and acknowledged that the show is bigger than any one actor. That part stood out to me because it almost sounded like he was preparing fans for the possibility that Marco could return, maybe even with a different face. So, I might be wrong, but this doesn't feel like a clean ending. It feels like a pause. And in a world like Port Charles, a pause is rarely the end of the story. I think for a long time, General Hospital treated Ezra like little more than a walking annoyance. Someone in nice shoes, but with terrible instincts and even worse timing. I kept expecting him to stay in that lane. But then the show started peeling him back, layer by layer. First, you could see the panic underneath the bluster. Then the fear, especially whenever Sidwell entered the picture. And eventually, something more unexpected crept in. Maybe not full decency, but at least the echo of it. Suddenly, a character who felt built for mockery started drifting into much more interesting territory. What stood out to me is that Ezra didn't just flip a switch and become noble. That would have felt cheap. Instead, the show let him be small, shaken, and painfully aware that he had tied himself to someone dangerous. That drunken scene at the Brown Dog could have easily been played for laughs or humiliation, but it wasn't. When Laura Collins brought him home, chose not to expose him with the video, and listened as he admitted he might have helped Sidwell frame her, the whole tone shifted. To me, that didn't feel like a villain unraveling. It felt like someone realizing just how disposable he really is. And then came the part that genuinely surprised me. Ezra didn't just confess, he stepped forward. When Laura suggested he help uncover why Sidwell is so determined to secure that helicopter flight plan, he agreed. Just like that, the same guy who looked like he might collapse under pressure was volunteering to step deeper into danger. That fist bump between them felt oddly significant, like a quiet turning point. I've noticed that redemption arcs usually don't start with heroics. They start with awareness. Ezra still feels slippery to me. He's still reactive, still prone to panic. But the writing has shifted those traits from punchlines into cracks in the foundation. And cracks in stories like this are where change begins. There's also something compelling about the idea that this version of Ezra, desperate, cornered, might actually be more useful than the polished version he pretended to be. He understands pressure because he's been crushed by it. And I can't help thinking that once someone truly realizes they're expendable, they become unpredictable. That kind of unpredictability can be dangerous, but it can also be exactly what brings down someone like Sidwell. Laura's role in all this feels just as important. She had every reason to expose Ezra, and she didn't. Instead, she gave him a chance. I keep wondering if that says even more about her than it does about him. But either way, it created the one thing redemption stories always need: someone willing to see potential where no one else does. I think what's really catching my attention on General Hospital lately is the surprisingly layered connection forming between Ezra Boyle and Laura Collins. It feels like one of those slow burn dynamics the show quietly builds until you suddenly realize it might be heading somewhere much bigger. With Kevin Collins away in Dublin, I get the sense that Laura is dealing with more than she's openly admitting. She knows Kevin leaving is the right call, especially with Ace Cassadine needing distance from Jen Sidwell. But that doesn't make the loneliness any easier. To me, that emotional gap is where things start to get complicated. At the same time, Ezra isn't exactly in a stable place either. I've noticed the show making a real effort to soften him, to peel back that slick exterior and show someone more isolated and stressed than he lets on. Still, he slips, like that awkward, drunken moment where he joked about something more happening between him and Laura. It was messy, maybe inappropriate, but also revealing. And I think that's what's fueling all this speculation. These two keep getting pushed into situations tied to Sidwell that neither of them wants, yet they're navigating it together. Naturally, that kind of shared pressure creates a bond. I'm starting to wonder if the writers are intentionally blurring the line between partnership and something more. That small scene on April 16th really stood out to me. Laura covering Ezra with a blanket after he fell asleep on her couch. It was such a quiet, tender moment, but it said a lot. Not dramatic, not romantic on the surface, but definitely intimate in a subtle way. So now I'm left thinking, where is this actually going? Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it feels like the show is building towards some kind of turning point. On one hand, I could see Ezra becoming collateral damage if Sidwell escalates things, which would leave Laura carrying a heavy emotional burden. On the other hand, if they grow closer and cross that emotional or even physical line, it could create a completely different kind of fallout, especially when Kevin returns. Either way, it doesn't feel sluché or accidental. To me, this storyline is clearly heading toward trouble. It's just a question of whether it's going to be tragic, romantic, or a mix of both.